After seeing an old couple rebuilding after the storm, the millionaire cowboy said, "I'll stop now." The storm had come without warning. One evening, the sky turned dark gray and the wind began to howl across the wide Texas plains. By morning, everything had changed. Trees were broken, fences were gone, and many small homes were badly damaged. The land looked tired, as if it had lost a battle overnight. Ethan Cole stood on a small hill, looking over the land he owned. He was known as a millionaire cowboy, a man who had built a large ranch from nothing. People respected him, but they also knew he kept to himself. He spoke little and worked hard. His success had made him strong, but also a bit distant from others. Behind him, his crew was busy. Big machines moved slowly, clearing fallen trees and broken wood. The sound of engines filled the air. Dust rose into the sky as the workers tried to fix what the storm had destroyed. Ethan adjusted his hat and looked around carefully. He was checking the damage, planning what needed to be done. For him, it was business. The faster things were fixed, the better. But then something caught his eye. Not far from where his crew was working, there was a small, old house. It looked weak, like it could fall at any moment. Parts of the roof were missing, and one side of the wall was broken. It was clear the storm had hit it hard. In front of that house stood an elderly couple. The man, Thomas, had gray hair and a slow walk, but his back was still straight. The woman, Eleanor, was small and gentle, her hands moving carefully as she picked up pieces of wood from the ground. They were working together, quietly, slowly, but with purpose. Ethan watched them for a moment. There were no machines, no help, no rush, just the two of them, rebuilding their home piece by piece. Thomas lifted a wooden plank and tried to place it near the wall. It was heavy, and his hands shook a little, but he did not stop. Eleanor walked over and held one side to help him. They did not speak much, but they understood each other without words. Ethan felt something strange in his chest. He could not explain it. He had seen many people lose things before, but this felt different. One of his workers walked up to him. "Sir, should we clear this whole section next?" the worker asked, pointing toward the land near the old house. Ethan looked again at the couple. The machines were getting closer to them. The loud noise and dust made their work harder, but they did not complain. They just kept going. "Go ahead," Ethan said at first, turning his eyes away. The worker nodded and walked back. The machines moved closer. The sound grew louder. Dust began to rise around the small house. Eleanor coughed lightly, but continued picking up small pieces of wood. Thomas tried to fix a broken part of the wall, even as the ground shook slightly from the machines nearby. Ethan took a few steps forward. He could see them more clearly now. There was no anger on their faces, no sadness either, only quiet determination. It reminded him of something from long ago. Ethan had not always been rich. Years ago, he had worked just as hard, building his life with his own hands. He remembered long days, simple meals, and the feeling of not giving up, no matter how hard things got. But over time, things had changed. He became successful, busy, focused on numbers, land, and growth. He stopped noticing small things. Until now. Eleanor bent down to pick up another piece of wood, but she moved slowly. For a moment, it looked like she might lose her balance. Thomas quickly reached out and helped her stand steady again. They shared a small smile. That simple moment made Ethan stop walking. He stood still, watching them. The machines kept moving. The noise grew louder, but Ethan's mind was no longer on the land or the work. It was on that small house, and the two people who refused to leave it behind. He took a deep breath. Something inside him began to change. And without fully knowing why, Ethan Cole started walking toward them. Ethan Cole walked slowly toward the old couple. The ground was still uneven from the storm, and pieces of broken wood lay everywhere. Behind him, the loud machines kept working, their engines roaring as they cleared the land. Thomas was trying to fix a loose board on the wall when Ethan came closer. Eleanor was picking up small nails from the dirt, placing them carefully in a small tin box. At first, they did not notice him. Ethan stopped a few steps away and looked at them again. Up close, he could see the tired lines on their faces. Their clothes were old and dusty but clean. Their hands were rough from years of hard work. Before he could say anything, a loud sound came from behind him. One of the machines moved closer, pushing broken wood aside. The ground shook slightly. Eleanor turned her head, surprised by the noise. She took a step back, but her foot slipped on loose dirt. For a brief second, it looked like she might fall. Thomas quickly reached out and held her arm. "I got you," he said softly. Ethan's eyes sharpened. Without thinking any longer, he turned around and raised his hand high. "I'll stop now," he called out firmly. His voice was strong and clear. It cut through the noise of the machines. The workers froze. Engines slowly turned off, one by one. The loud sounds faded, and for the first time that day, the land became quiet again. The crew looked confused. They were not used to sudden orders like this. Time was important, and stopping work meant delay. One worker walked closer. "Sir, is something wrong?" he asked. Ethan did not answer right away. His eyes were still on the old couple. "Just stop for now," Ethan said calmly. The worker nodded, even though he did not fully understand, and walked back. Now, there was only silence, and the soft sound of wind moving through the broken trees. Thomas and Eleanor turned toward Ethan. They looked unsure. A stranger, well-dressed and confident, standing near their home. This usually meant trouble. Ethan took a few steps closer and removed his hat politely. "Good afternoon," he said in a calm voice. Thomas nodded slowly, but did not smile. "Afternoon," he replied. Eleanor stood quietly beside him, watching Ethan carefully. Ethan looked at the house, then back at them. "You've had a rough time after the storm," he said. Thomas gave a short nod. "Storm took a lot, but we'll fix it." His voice was steady, even though his body looked tired. Ethan glanced around. There were broken walls, missing roof pieces, and scattered tools. It was clear the damage was serious. "You're rebuilding this? By yourselves?" Ethan asked. Eleanor answered this time, her voice soft but firm. "This is our home. It's always been ours." Ethan could hear the pride in her words. Thomas added, "Been here over 50 years. We're not leaving now." Ethan paused. He respected that answer. He looked back at the machines, then at the dust still floating in the air. "My crew was working close," he said. "The noise and dust, it must be making things harder." Thomas gave a small shrug. "We've seen worse," he said. "We'll manage." But Ethan could see the truth. Their slow movements, their tired faces. It was not easy for them. Eleanor bent down again, picking up another small piece of wood. This time, she moved even more carefully. Ethan felt that same strange feeling in his chest again. "You didn't ask for help?" he asked. Thomas shook his head. "No need. We can handle our own work." There was no anger in his voice, only quiet strength. Ethan nodded slowly. He understood that kind of pride. Asking for help was not easy, especially for people who had spent their whole lives working on their own. For a moment, no one spoke. The wind blew gently, moving dust across the ground. Somewhere far away, a bird called out. Ethan looked at the house one more time. He could already see how much work it would take to fix it properly. Then he looked at Thomas and Eleanor. They were still standing strong, even after everything they had lost. Ethan placed his hat back on his head and took a small step back. "All right," he said quietly. Thomas watched him closely, unsure what he would say next. Ethan turned slightly toward his crew in the distance. They were waiting, watching him for instructions. Then he looked back at the couple. There was a calm but clear decision in his eyes now. Something had shifted inside him, and even though he had not said it yet, it was clear. This moment was going to change more than just the work on that land. Ethan stood quietly for a moment, looking at Thomas and Eleanor. The wind moved gently around them, and the silence felt different now, calm but full of meaning. Behind him, his crew waited. Some of them leaned on their tools, watching from a distance. They were ready to start work again, but they knew better than to move without his order. Ethan took a deep breath. He looked at the small house again, the broken roof, the weak walls, the scattered wood. Then he looked at the couple. They were still holding on, still trying, even when everything seemed too much. It reminded him of his past. Years ago, Ethan had been just like them. He had no money, no big land, no crew. Just hard work and long days. He remembered fixing old fences by himself, sleeping under open skies, and building his life piece by piece. Back then, no one had helped him. Or maybe someone had. In small ways, he had forgotten. Ethan's eyes softened. He turned around and called out, "Jake!" One of his lead workers quickly walked over. "Yes, boss?" Ethan pointed toward the old house. "We're not clearing this area right now." Jake looked surprised. "But sir, this section is part of the plan. If we delay—" Ethan gently raised his hand. "I know the plan," he said calmly. "We'll adjust it." Jake stayed quiet, waiting for more instructions. Ethan spoke clearly this time. "Instead of clearing, we help rebuild that house." For a second, Jake did not move. He blinked, unsure if he heard correctly. "Help? Rebuild?" he repeated. Ethan nodded. Yes, get the crew ready. We'll bring tools, wood, whatever is needed. Jake looked back at the other workers, then at the couple. Slowly, a small smile appeared on his face. All right, boss, he said, and walked back to give orders. The crew began to move again, but differently this time. Instead of machines pushing things away, workers started gathering materials, picking up tools, and walking toward the old house. Thomas noticed the change. He frowned slightly. What's going on? He asked. Ethan turned back to him. We're going to help you rebuild, he said simply. Thomas's face became serious. No, he said quickly. We don't take charity. Eleanor looked at him, then at Ethan. She stayed silent but listened closely. Ethan shook his head gently. It's not charity, he said. Just neighbors helping neighbors. Thomas crossed his arms slightly. We've managed on our own for years. Ethan nodded. I can see that, and you've done a great job. He paused, then added softly. But there's nothing wrong with a little help when it's needed. Thomas looked down at his hands. They were tired, rough, and shaking just a little. Eleanor spoke quietly this time. Thomas, maybe just a little help, she said. Thomas looked at her. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he looked at the house, the broken roof, the weak wall he had been trying to fix for hours. He let out a slow breath. All right, he said finally. But we worked together. Ethan gave a small smile. Of course. Within minutes, the crew reached the house. Some workers began fixing the roof, carefully placing new wooden boards. Others started repairing the wall, making it strong again. Ethan did not stand back like a boss. Instead, he rolled up his sleeves and joined them. He picked up a hammer and helped place nails into the wood. It had been a long time since he worked like this, but his hands still remembered. Thomas watched him for a moment, then gave a small nod of respect. You've done this before, Thomas said. Ethan smiled slightly. A long time ago. Eleanor brought a small bucket of nails and handed it to one of the workers. Be careful with those, she said kindly. The crew worked carefully, treating the house like it truly mattered. As time passed, the broken place slowly began to look like a home again. The sun moved across the sky, and the light became softer. For the first time since the storm, there was a feeling of hope in the air. Ethan stepped back for a moment and looked at everything. His crew was working together with the couple. Thomas was guiding one worker on how to place a beam properly. Eleanor was cleaning up small pieces and even smiling a little. Ethan felt something warm inside him. This was not about land or money anymore. This was about people. And for the first time in a long while, Ethan Cole felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. The sun rose slowly over the plains, bringing a soft golden light across the land. It had been several days since Ethan gave the order to stop the machines and help the old couple. What once looked broken and tired was now changing into something strong again. The small house was no longer weak and falling apart. New wooden boards stood firm where the walls had been broken. The roof was almost complete, with fresh shingles placed carefully by Ethan's crew. The ground around the house was clean, free from scattered wood and debris. Thomas stood near the doorway, holding a tool in his hand. He looked around quietly, taking in every small detail. It was hard for him to believe how much had changed in such a short time. Eleanor stepped outside, wiping her hands gently on her apron. She looked at the roof, then at the walls, and then at the people working around her, her eyes filled with soft emotion. But she smiled. It looks like home again, she said quietly. Ethan stood a few steps away, watching the final touches being completed. He had been there every day, working alongside his crew. His clothes were no longer perfectly clean like before. His hands had small marks and dust, just like the others. But he did not mind. Jake walked over to him. Boss, the roof will be done in an hour, he said. After that, we can finish the fence. Ethan nodded. Good. Take your time. Make sure it's done right. Jake smiled. Always. Nearby, 2 workers were fixing a small wooden porch in front of the house. Another group was setting up a stronger fence around the land, making sure it would stand firm even if another storm came. Thomas slowly walked toward Ethan. For a moment, he said nothing. He simply stood beside him, looking at the house. You didn't have to do all this, Thomas said finally. Ethan kept his eyes on the house. I know, he replied. Thomas nodded slowly. But you did. There was a quiet respect in his voice now. Ethan turned slightly toward him. Some things are worth more than plans and schedules, he said. Thomas looked at him and gave a small smile. Eleanor joined them, holding a small cloth in her hands. You gave us more than help, she said gently. You gave us hope. Ethan did not answer right away. He was not used to such words. Instead, he gave a small nod. Work continued, and soon the final piece of the roof was placed. One of the workers called out, "It's done!" The crew stepped back, looking at what they had built together. The house stood strong and beautiful. It was still simple, but now it felt safe, warm, and full of life again. Eleanor covered her mouth softly, holding back tears. Thomas placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Ethan walked closer to the house, looking at every part of it. He made sure everything was solid and complete. "Looks good," he said quietly. Jake stepped forward. "We also added some extra support inside the walls," he said. "It'll hold better in bad weather." Ethan nodded. "Good thinking." Thomas turned toward the crew. "Thank you, all of you," he said sincerely. The workers smiled. Some nodded, others simply stood quietly, feeling proud of their work. Eleanor walked up to Ethan. "You didn't just fix our house," she said. "You reminded us that good people still exist." Ethan looked at her, then at Thomas, then at the house. For a moment, he felt something he had not felt in a long time, a deep sense of peace. Later that afternoon, as the crew began packing up their tools, Ethan stepped aside and made a quiet phone call. He spoke in a low voice, giving simple instructions. He made sure that the land where the house stood would always belong to Thomas and Eleanor. No future plans, no changes. This place would remain theirs. He did not tell them. He did not want thanks for that. As the sun began to set, the sky turned orange and pink. The light touched the house, making it glow softly. Ethan walked toward his horse, preparing to leave. Thomas called out, "Ethan." Ethan turned back. Thomas stepped forward. "If you ever pass by again, you'll always have a place here." Eleanor nodded with a warm smile. Ethan gave a small smile in return. "I might just do that," he said. He placed his hat firmly on his head, mounted his horse, and took one last look at the house. It was no longer just a building. It was a symbol of strength, kindness, and second chances. Ethan gently turned his horse and rode away across the open land. As he moved farther into the distance, he realized something important. Stopping the work that day had not cost him anything. Instead, it had given him something far more valuable, a reminder of who he once was, and who he still could be.